time for another round of brandy. Candid conversations over cocktails about all things brand. With your hosts, Reilly Newman and Scott Saunders, the brand developers behind Motif Brands.
Welcome back to another round of brandy. This is actually going into the week of Thanksgiving.
Yeah, for our American listeners, then you know that this week we celebrate Thanksgiving. It's always funny that the term loosening the belt, you always associate that with Thanksgiving. It's like, yeah, it's not like Christmas or anything. It's always Thanksgiving that people overindulge. Like you're feeding yourself so much food.
Very American holiday.
Speaking of food, that leads us into just a little quick blip of brand news that we've found rather very humorous and hard to actually accept as being this is truth.
So Lay's, the company, which is owned by PepsiCo, I believe, they did a survey among their consumers.
Well, before that, even just Lay's. When you say Lay's, what comes to mind?
Potato chips.
Lay's potato chips,
yeah,
right?
And they have all different flavors, but Lay's is a classic American brand. It's been around probably for decades and decades, but the potato chip brand, and Lay's did a consumer study of their audience, and it turned out that about 41 or 42% of their consumers did not know that Lay's come from farm-grown potatoes.
First of all, it says potato chips on the bag after underneath Lay's, but that you'd be eating, if you've ever eaten Lay's, you know that it's a potato chip. You know the difference between that and a tortilla chip.
I'm amazed by it. I remember I saw the headline and I was like, no way. I clicked on it and just kind of fell into it, but quite surprising.
Yes.
Quite surprising.
Now we'll shift gears because we're going to be talking about something else today, not Lay's potato chips.
Yeah, so kind of during this time of holidays where people are taking off, you got a little bit of slower lull maybe in your market, and things are just time to evaluate and zoom out a little. We're visiting the topic of status quo. And with all the businesses that we've worked with, no matter the size, there's always this gravitational pull for the founder or even the marketing team or those responsible for getting the word out, is that there's this gravitational pull in every market to just kind of do what everyone else is doing.
We throw that term around, status quo, but by definition, it basically means the current state of affairs.
And unfortunately, typically with status quo, it usually gets to a point where, like what Scott was saying, is it gets to a point where, well, that's just the way it's always been done. Well, why?
Oh, yeah.
Why would we question that? Or no, they've always done it that way. And maybe you took someone's job as a marketer, or you're new to a company, and sometimes those situations will come up. Well, like, well, why are we doing it this way? And everyone else on the team might be like, well, that's the way we've always done it. That's the way John did it.
Businesses, corporations of any size usually have that changing of the guard, whether it's at the high level of management, or an owner, or it's smaller people that are coming up and working their way up that have new, fresh ideas, and sometimes you always get the newer ideas brushing against the older ideas, and with that idea of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, just
right?
keep it going, and which, okay, there's advantages to that. If something's working, sometimes don't mess with it. Just let it. You exploit it. You don't experiment, and you just let it run its course, keep the main thing, and just keep kind of tapping and tapping into that momentum. However, sometimes you don't need to exploit, and sometimes you do need to experiment. You need to explore. You need to get out there and try something different, or maybe look from a different perspective. And so you could easily see how this applies to internally at companies where, oh yeah, we've always done it that way. We've always advertised, or we've always done that certain ad, or we've always sponsored that event, and it just kind of becomes the motions. And I think on a bigger scale, you can see how this applies to markets as a whole, or industries, where you go, well, everyone else in our industry does this, right. Or everyone always does this kind of thing, or they do this on social media, so we need to do it too.
Same thing with a brand, business or brand. In that case, have the same things. I think probably the biggest issue though is that it really comes down to action versus inaction. By taking a step, by changing something, you're going to have consequences. Thereby, by not changing anything, there's no consequences. That's how we think. That's just generally how we kind of compartmentalize things. And the idea is that when it comes to your business or brand, particularly your brand, that sometimes, to take action or not take action, they both have consequences.
It kind of reminds me of like optimistic thinkers versus pessimistic, is that the fallacy, the the bad idea is that, oh, if I'm just pessimistic and I go, nah, nothing good will come from this, it's actually less risky than someone being optimistic and they make a bet on something, or they take an action and they go, no, this potentially could work out, guys. It could actually work. And then it falls through, or the rug gets pulled out on them, and then they look like a fool and mud's on their face. And someone goes, oh, see, I told you, right?
Yeah, but risk nothing, gain nothing.
Yeah. And so then when there is that cost, right, there's that risk of putting yourself out there and going, hey, I think we need to double down on this, or I think we need to shake it up and try this new approach. There's risk in that. But just as much as there's risk and cost to opportunity costs of not doing something. Like Scott was saying, with inaction, there is opportunity costs associated with that, where you might miss an opportunity, or you might actually become stagnant and then actually start decaying and eroding your position in the market, or maybe just the momentum you have. So it's kind of something to look at when you're making decisions, and even your marketing and your brand as a whole is going, okay, are we actually, yes, it may be safe, it may be comfortable, it may just be kind of now a habit to be in the status quo and not actually pushing the envelope. But at a certain point, you're just playing defense and you're kind of sitting back and just waiting for things to come, and then you're reacting, versus being responsive and playing offense and pushing and going forward. And yes, it's going to be uncomfortable. Yes, there's going to be change and there's going to be things that are happening, but that's what you have to do now, especially with the economy as it is that the economy has definitely become more volatile, like just over time. And that has to do with technology and things speeding up, and you're getting quicker cycles. So you have to be on your toes, and you have to be always looking for the gaps in the market, and always looking to go, how can I break the status quo, and how can I keep pushing and really going forward, especially going into the new year. Like, especially right now during the holidays, it's like, again, most things are just asleep. You have a lot of just kind of people going through the motions and kind of half asleep. But I think it's now to go, okay, well, what did we do this year? Where are we going for next year? How are we actually going to push the envelope and play offense and start actually looking for how to do things differently?
Yeah, I mean, even if you had a fairly good year as a business, it doesn't mean your attitude should be going, okay, we don't need to change anything. Because that's, I mean, if you are a ship, then basically you're just letting your sail go down. You're not going anywhere. You're not going in any direction. You decide, okay, we're just going to park it here, drop anchor out in the middle of the ocean, right? Yeah. But you're going to always, there's storms to have to deal with. They're out of your control. There's waves, there's swell. So those things are all outside of your ship, outside of your control. So that's why you always have to be heading some direction to be able to navigate in and around that. So you can't just pull off the side of the road. You need to roll into every year going, okay, what worked well for us this year? We've had a decent year. So what really worked in our favor? How could we sharpen the blade on that endeavor to maybe cut more through the market, or gain a bigger audience for that? Or what wasn't? What were some of why we didn't have a good year? What went wrong?
Yeah, and I feel like even with businesses, it's even quicker. Like, you need to do this quarterly. Heck, even monthly, of going like, okay, how are things going? What's the pulse on it? How am I continuing to refine? Because there is that, it's constantly eroding. It's constantly kind of seeping, just like a battery loses energy over time, because that energy is always dissipating. It's seeping out. And so even with your business, your position in the market, how you're doing things, or even just the angle you have on the market it's always getting more dull just over time. So you have to keep that sharp. And even, taking risks, I think there's value in just the risk taking aspect. And I think that's what makes entrepreneurs and founders extremely valuable to like the economy as a whole. But just as even for small businesses, is like being able to kind of put it out there and go for those things and be optimistic and hope for the best. There's value in that. And I think that shouldn't be discounted. And a good example of that is Nvidia, which, if you haven't heard of Nvidia, you haven't been reading the news. And they're kind of everywhere right now because they're leading the whole AI stuff, and they're massive, pushing a $5 trillion market cap, which is the first time ever. They're leading the economy on many fronts. And this didn't happen overnight. So if you're familiar with Nvidia, they sell GPUs to pretty much everyone who's wanting to do AI. And Jensen Huang, who's the CEO, made this bet over 20 years ago. And it was because he was watching the market and kind of playing along. They did video game stuff and all of that. And he saw some computer scientists using GPUs to create clouds on programs, to generate clouds. And so Jensen went, that's an interesting pattern he's recognizing. I wonder if it's going to catch on. And so he started leaning more into GPUs over CPUs, which are big in the market with Intel and stuff. But the GPUs, which are graphic processing units, he leaned into that. And that is essentially what has become the backbone of the entire AI economy and the new economy that's being birthed. And it's because he made this very, very risky bet 20 years ago of going, hey, we're going to focus the company on this. We're going to actually push this way. And it's just incredible because they just had a quarter and it's $57 billion in a quarter. And they're just slam dunking on everyone. And it's because this guy who has a fairly small team, and he just saw a pattern and he went all in on it, even though people at the time, shareholders, investors, were all telling him, this is a stupid idea. No one's doing GPUs. What are you doing? And they were actually like mocking him, and they thought he was crazy, but he just kept doubling down on it. So, it's a mixture of, like we always talk about, that long-term strategy and having that vision and being able to take risk on it. Because could you imagine if he didn't do that? If Nvidia didn't lean into GPUs or anything, it would have completely, this complete loss of a market, of a probably the biggest jump we've seen in the economy in probably like a century, like honestly, since electricity, maybe.
Yeah. And you were even, I think you were using the analogy of like Nvidia is going to do for the US what Sony did for Japan.
Yeah. And
back in the day.
And the history of Sony in Japan is that Sony launched, which again, a crazy story is that Sony was launched on the tail end of World War II. Japan was decimated, had nothing. The economy was tanked. Nothing was working. Groceries not on shelves, anything. And Sony emerged from that because they made a bet and they started pushing and leaning in towards the Walkman and all these things that this guy had this vision of. And at the time, Japan was known as not quality products. What came out of Japan was trash. And so even on their products, they would put very, very, very small made in Japan. And since then, Japan has become known for high design, high quality products, and now Sony is
an innovation. A lot of innovation.
And Steve Jobs specifically said he wanted to be the Sony of computers that he was getting going because Sony was on that pedestal, and the entrepreneur at the time he had that vision and just that detailed mind. And I think Nvidia is going to do the same of leading America and North America on the AI front. Yeah. So with all that being said, it's like, if you just go with the status quo, you're missing out on a lot of opportunity. And I think as part of the strength that needs to go into founders and marketing teams is being able to have the strength and the kind of boldness to go against the status quo and not just go with the current state of things.
Yeah, and it could be, again, I feel like all of our, our examples, are like massive, giant behemoths in the market space, right? Nvidia, Sony, Apple, all this other stuff. But I mean, even just breaking away from status quo, just even in the small scale, open your eyes to your brand, your business going to this coming around in the bend of the new year of like, what are some minor things you could just tighten here, loosen up there, that might be a boost. And it just means you've got to get away from the mentality of, if it's not broke, don't fix it. There's always ways to improve. And it doesn't mean that you're, like, even if you think in terms of just like your own personal improvement as a person, it doesn't mean you're broken now. It just means you want to be healthier. You want to be better. It's more of minor recalibrations and not staying in the status quo.
Yeah. Again, that gravitational pull, and you'll feel it. Like you'll feel, well, everyone else is doing this, or I shouldn't change my hours, or we should close at this time because everyone else closes at this time. And sometimes there's truth in certain things, but then there's also fallacies and things that just been baked in over time, or things have changed and the status quo is no longer viable.
Yeah.
And then it's just being held on to for almost like tradition's sake.
Yeah, I mean, look at like Kodak, who was very late to try to embrace the digital world, and struggling with digital cameras, and they should have been on the forefront of everything digital photography, and they weren't, and because they were struggling to break away from the status quo.
Yeah. But I just wanted to give you a reminder and encourage you during this time to zoom out a little, kind of focus on maybe there are some patterns that you're like, man, I didn't push it this year, or I should going into this year, I should look at ways going, maybe there's something that we can flip on its head, or some small little changes we can make here and there and look for ways where you could find those opportunities. Because really in change, even right now as the market is changing, things are, evolving very, very fast. There's opportunity in that. And I think that's part of the entrepreneurial mindset, is like this opportunistic view on things. You're going, okay, just because things are changing, I'm not going to freak out. I'm not going to sell all my shares. I'm not going to just jump out. I'm going to look for the opportunity. And it's like behind every storm, there's still a blue sky. So it's like being able to look at going, no, there is going to be a time for change, and there's a time to really lean into that and grab this opportunity and just kind of like hold on for dear life. But also there's a lot of advantages to actually being bold enough to do that.
For sure. So as we head into the Thanksgiving week, we hope you guys celebrate well, and we are thankful for your guys' faithful listenership. We don't get it. There's no revenue in this for us. Our joy is just knowing that we just try to help the audience out there have a better mindset towards brand and running their business. And just happy Thanksgiving and cheers.